Welcome to another episode of Women in Net Lease. I am Camille Renshaw, CEO and co-founder of B+E. B+E is a net lease brokerage firm that works across the United States. We have offices in 9 cities. We help our clients buy and sell net lease real estate, varying from retail assets to industrial to medical and some other esoteric types of single tenant net lease. We're very excited about another episode in this series. We hope it is bringing value to women who are early in their careers, wondering, maybe they're in college, wondering what courses they should take, and gosh, what is this thing net lease? What is this thing commercial real estate? All the way up to women who may be my age or even much older, who are looking to make their own investments, or they're looking for their next career move, perhaps being on their first paid board or public board seat. We've been lucky to interview folks like Chris McDonald, who is head of real estate at Checkers, and talk about what's involved in managing their portfolio and growing their real estate and bottom line for both corporate and franchisees. We've talked to people like Colette English Dixon, who runs Roosevelt University's real estate program and is on the public board of Marcus and Millichap. Today, we're going to speak with Carmen Decker, who is an executive at Kimco. Carmen, I'm so glad you're with me here today for the Women in Net Lease series. How are you?
Doing very well, thank you. How are you?
Great, great. I'm excited that our audience can meet Carmen Decker, who is currently with Kimco and also has a couple of other board seats and things that we can talk about. But given what a large shopping center retail owner Kimco is and the experience that you've had in your background, I think it'll be fantastic for a lot of the listeners to see where you've been to get where you are today. What is you corrected me on your title recently. What is your new title?
Regional president for the Western region.
Great. And you live in Seattle?
I do. I live in Seattle, in the Magnolia neighborhood of Seattle, for those who are familiar. I've been here, spent some time in San Francisco, but outside of the 6 years I spent in San Francisco, I've lived here my whole life.
So I'll ask you to start us by introducing yourself the way that you do at a cocktail party or with people who don't know much about real estate.
Okay. I love this question. That's funny. I think generally when I introduce myself at a cocktail party, it kind of depends on the first reaction to me saying that I work for a REIT. So sometimes when you say you work for a REIT, people know exactly what, and you can tell by their face, they know exactly what you mean. And other times it's like a completely blank stare. So if I say I work for a REIT and they already know what that is, it's a different conversation. But if I say I work for a REIT and it's a little bit of a blank stare, I generally then say a REIT is a real estate investment trust, which is essentially a real estate company. And the REIT that I work for is a retail REIT, which means we own, manage, construct, and operate shopping centers. And in my role for Kimco as a regional president, what I do every day is I manage the P&L for the region, manage the strategy, and then all of the operational teams in the region. So the operational teams are the people every day who run the shopping center. And those include your construction teams and your property management team and your leasing team and asset management. And so my job is just to make sure that that ship that, that we try to move along every day keeps running out here in the region.
And this is exactly what you thought you would be when you grew up, right?
No, this is not anything close to what I thought I'd be when I grew up. When I was a kid, I always wanted to be a teacher. So when I was in college, I actually went to the University of Washington, which is here in Seattle, University of Washington Huskies. And when I was growing up, I was going to be a teacher. So I majored in college in history and American ethnic studies, which I always explain is essentially the history of minorities in the United States. So majored in those two. And when I got done, I spent a lot of time like volunteering in schools and college and coaching sports teams. As you can see by my basketball in the background, I'm a huge fan of basketball. And I moved to San Francisco to take a job as a teacher in the Oakland area. And unfortunately, that was right around 9/11. And all the teaching jobs dried up. And so I couldn't get a teaching job. There were no teaching jobs to be had. and I met a guy that owned a real estate company who was looking for an office manager. And that's how I got into real estate.
That's how you got your first commercial real estate gig.
Yeah. Yeah.
So tell me more about that experience. What about it was so compelling that you're still here today?
No, I've talked about this a couple times with folks because it is such a, I mean, I think a lot of us get into real estate just by chance. So that's not overly unusual. But I think one of the things I think is when I kind of reflect back, that's kind of funny about my journey is that as a child, my mom was really into residential real estate, which is obviously different than commercial. But I think we spent a lot of time as young, as a family, like going to open house stuff just because that was something that interested her for whatever reason. I always kind of loved design and I loved real estate, but I didn't really love residential and I didn't know that commercial existed, right? And so when I got into a place where I couldn't get a teaching job and I met that gentleman who owned a real estate company and I got into it, it was first through office leasing, actually. And I didn't really love office leasing, but I met a woman who did retail and I was like, wow, this is fascinating. I had no idea that there are people out there who merchandise and program a shopping center. And that's why when you go to one shopping center, you might feel like, meh, that's not really like that interesting of an experience, but you go to another one and you want to come back over and over and over again because somebody made that happen, right? So I think that I had that initial exposure to real estate through my mom as a kid and kind of her obsession with residential real estate. And then as I started to, get into that job, I immediately was like, this is something that's very interesting to me. And even though I love teaching and I thought that I was going to be a high school or elementary school teacher, I actually today realize I teach every day. That's kind of what I do in my role. I mean,
I was thinking that.
Yeah, I teach tenants, I teach my team members, I teach, young folks that I mentor. Like I do that every day, even just in a different capacity.
That seems very true and key, that communication piece. I always tell students when they ask me about a career in commercial real estate, how important communication and liberal art degrees are in terms of learning how to tell story, learning how to have narratives that connect with your teammates. And then when it comes to large assets like we deal with in commercial real estate, I think the stories of those places are really important. Certainly a business degree and classes in real estate are important if that's where you think you're going to head. But a lot of those liberal art classes that I know my parents questioned me taking and how was I going to get a job utilizing those classes have been game changers for me, in terms of bringing teams together. So
I completely agree. And understanding people. I think that that's a huge part of it too, right? Understanding what motivates people when you're doing a deal is really important. And those are things that I feel like, you learn in those types of courses when you're, and you don't even realize you're really learning that at the time.
Right.
And then with history, I just feel like I use history and just the general concept that you reflect back on what's happened in the past to kind of tell you a little bit about what's going to happen when you're in a new situation every day. Like I use that every single day of my life. So I wouldn't change it.
So I'm curious, what was your first big milestone shopping center project?
Yeah. Okay. So when I was in the Bay Area, so after I left the first company I worked at, I went to a company called Terranomics, which anyone who's done a lot of business in the Bay Area and is at least our age knows what Terranomics was. So Terranomics was kind of the largest, powerhouse retail brokerage firm in the Bay Area. And I'm super lucky to get a job there. And then worked under a gentleman who I still am very close friends with. I would say, I like to say he's, like my uncle. He likes to say he's like my brother because he doesn't want me to age him. But he worked on the Target account. So I was a junior broker on the Target account, like when I got into business, which was the most amazing experience because what we would do is we'd go into these Northern California markets that Target had generally identified as like, hey, we might want a store here. And we would meet with municipalities and talk about their housing growth plans. And there wasn't the same programs we have today. And so I would literally take a map and like draw on the map where starts were going to be and, the number of homes and what years they were phasing. And we'd put together these maps. And these big projects for Target to say, hey, this is exactly where we think you need to be. And then we would go and pull all of the ownership information, and we would just start calling those owners and saying, hey, we would like to buy this property. We would hook them up then with a developer, and Target would build their piece, and then our developer would build everything else around it. And then we would lease all of that out. I mean, it was just like, years long projects, but really fun stuff. And that's when I was like, this is amazing, and I want to keep doing this forever.
Yeah, I remember back then how it was a bragging point if you worked for a brokerage firm that had a printer that was big enough to print all that, like to stretch out on a board room table and stand up and go through it together. It's funny, today it's AI. Back then it was printing large maps, but it was a game changer because you could visualize and you could really make decisions at the table. Yeah.
Exactly.
So I am curious, in all of these multitude of roles that you've played, even more than we've mentioned, I would love for you to kind of walk through what it looks like for a landlord to take a newly purchased building or a newly vacant shopping center and take it all the way to being fully operational, leased, and as successful as you described one a moment ago.
Yeah, there's so much that goes into it, right? And there's so many players that play a role in taking, as you said, a shopping center from being just developed. And even if it's already developed, maybe you buy an asset that is a value add opportunity where it's got a lot of vacancy. And I'll just explain from there even. You buy an asset that's a value opportunity. Maybe the demographics have shifted in that market, over the last 10 years. And so you've got a lot of vacancy, and the shopping center is really no longer serving that individual community. You really start by first identifying who is the customer, who is the person who in a perfect world would be coming to this shopping center every day. Once you've identified that customer, then you work on a merchandising plan. So, sometimes you come to a shopping center and you have an experience where it's fine. It's nothing special. And it's got, a Target and it's got a TJ Maxx and it's got a grocery store, but it could be any shopping center anywhere. And then sometimes you come to a shopping center and you were like, I feel like this feels like an extension of home and I want to keep coming back. I want to come here and I want to sit at these tables when it's sunny out and let my kids run around in the grass, whatever. That's the ideal situation. You create a situation that people want to come and visit that shopping center multiple times a week, ideally, because it's an extension of their home and their community. So
it's not just shopping, it's an experience.
Absolutely. And that's something that's actually a little bit newer, right? It didn't used to be that you wanted the shopping center to be an experience, but that's that new buzzword that we all talk about all the time, right? An entertainment piece, an experience, but it's the most important part now of that shopping center experience, because you can put a Target anywhere you want, or you can put a Whole Foods anywhere you want, but people have to then drive to it, and they're more likely to drive to yours if it's an experience, right?
Absolutely.
So you identify your customer, then you put together a merchandising plan to make sure how do I set up the shopping center so that people come as often as possible and want to keep coming back. And then once you've identified that, you start calling prospective tenants and get them all the information that they might need. And every tenant needs something different. I've seen you've had someone from Checkers, for example, on your podcast that talked about what they look for. And every tenant looks for something different. So you have your leasing team reach out to them. If they're interested, you negotiate an LOI. In negotiating the LOI, you've got construction involved and property management and leasing and asset management. And all these people are trying to figure out the best deal, best space, how we're going to build it out, how much it's going to cost, whether the deal makes sense from an economics perspective. And then hopefully you get to a lease signing, but that's not it. After the lease signing, then your construction team really kicks in, and the construction team will build out your space for you, or for the tenant, working in conjunction with the tenant's construction team. They have to go and meet with municipalities. And then finally, your marketing team steps in to help with pre-opening marketing. So getting the word out that, hey, we just had an announcement in Bellevue, Washington, that T&T Grocery, which is an Asian supermarket out of Canada, is opening their first location in the United States and that asset, right? For example. And so our marketing team is working with theirs on just blasting that every which way they can to help get the word out that they're coming so that they have the most successful opening as possible. But also we can use that to then attract more tenants to the shopping center because that will help better serve that community. So it's a really long process, and a process I think most people don't even know is happening to bring a tenant to a shopping center.
And there's so many people involved in that process. And I know a lot of what you're doing is creating a strategy and managing that team to different milestones. But people who might be at an earlier place in their career could be in a bunch of different seats there. You know, some of the things that you sped past were interviewing some of the people that are doing those jobs and being able to identify who would be the best for different types of construction or brokerage or whatever it is. And then all the budgeting that comes with it. And also doing all these things in 100 different places in the United States alone, and having all those skills, having all those relationships, having had all those past experiences that compound, you know, to create that experience. It's pretty exciting. And you could be somebody who is more relational and find a position in your division, I would think. And you could be somebody who has, you know, a background as a CPA or something more on the math business side, and they could very much find a position within your team, I would think.
Absolutely. I mean, like you said, I mean, you're talking about marketing people who generally are, you know, our head of marketing for the West Coast is incredibly creative, right? So, you know, somebody who's a little bit more artistic and there's that role. And then you've got an asset manager who's more of a back of house in terms of, you know, they're not tenant facing or client facing necessarily, but you know, their role in really crunching the numbers and helping the team decide how to make this deal the best possible deal for the company is like incredibly valuable. And then you've got your construction person who their relationships with cities could not be more important, right? Architects, contractors, all of those relationships. So they're really both, it's important for them to understand the nuts and bolts of construction and also be super curious about like the trends in terms of pricing and how long it takes to get materials and all of that, but also those relationships, like those relationships are so important. So those are very relational roles, right? And then you've got your property manager who that's a tenant facing role. So it's very customer service based if that's something you're into. So yeah, there's a million different roles. In fact, this is kind of a sidetrack, but I volunteer and Kimco volunteers with a company organization called Project Destined, where we mentor minority students, college students who have ever at some point have ever thought about going into real estate, right? So they are involved in like pitching a business. It's kind of like a competition, you know, they kind of get in teams and they compete to like see who pitches the best pitch, right? And every time without fail, when we start, I ask how many people want to be in real estate. And maybe half of them say they do. Some of them are like, oh, I'm just looking for like an internship and I thought it'd be interesting, but I'm really into accounting. Or, but I'm really like, I majored in communication, so I don't think there's a role in real estate. And by the end of the internship, we've talked about all the different roles and almost every single one of them is like, I want to be in real estate now. I didn't even know that I could take the skills that I have and the things that I'm into and be in real estate, which is one of the things that's so cool about the industry.
That's amazing. And I did not know that Kimco was involved in Project Destined. We actually have had a minor role in it as well, B&E. So
Wonderful.
for the listeners out there, projectdestined.com is where you could start. So you have worked at a number of firms between the Target project and today. Are there any other significant milestones or significant projects that you feel like made you the executive you are today?
You know, I think that the biggest influence was probably that first role working with Target, because I think that's a super unique role. I mean, the type of things that we are working on, you know, a lot of times there's many different types of brokers, right, that are out there, leasing brokers that are out there, but there are not a lot of them that have to go that in depth for their clients in order to just convince them to do a deal. So that was a very unique role. And I think because it required so much curiosity and so much, you could not do that role if you didn't enjoy learning. And you couldn't do that role if you were afraid of failure, right? It wasn't be possible. So I think that was probably the biggest one. And then I would say when I moved back up to Seattle, so I was there, like I said, for 6 years, and then I moved back up to Seattle and I got a job at another brokerage firm, and it was a great firm, but wasn't really working on, I felt like at the time, for me, I was working like on a piece of the process, right? So you're working on, once your tenant comes to you and they've identified areas that they want to open a location, and you assist them in finding that and help them negotiate the LOI, and then you kind of pass it off to somebody else. I felt like I was missing the more creative, I guess, stuff that I was working on before.
Yeah.
And then and so that actually, I had I guess, a moment in my career where I started to pause and think, is this like really what I want to keep doing? Because it wasn't as fulfilling in that moment. And then by some, coincidence, I got a call from Kimco because I had done work for them in the Bay Area, and they knew I'd moved back to Seattle, and they said, hey, do you want to come and interview for a role for a director of leasing? So I think those would probably be the two biggest kind of points in my career. I would also say, though, that I am admittedly get bored super easy, and I always have to be learning, and I always have to be, I'm just a really curious person by nature. And so as I've been at Kimco, I've been in three different roles at Kimco, in large part because once I kind of get in the groove, and I'm like a little bit of a squirrel person where I'll be working on something and I'm like, wait a second, that looks fun. What do you do? Like, I want to learn what that is, And so that's kind of, I think, helped me grow into the role that I'm in today.
Well, I think that curiosity piece is so huge. We really interview for that here. We talk about it with each other after interviews. Did they ask you questions? What questions did they ask you during the interview? Do you think they're a deeply curious person? Because I think especially at this moment in time in real estate, things are speeding up, and that we have new problems that we haven't had exactly before, but they do feel like a configuration of past problems just put together differently. But it's going a lot faster, especially as we're adding AI and other things on top of it. So you need to be deeply curious, I think, to be successful and handle problems like the pandemic. That none of us really thought about what that would feel like at work before. And I'm sure, especially running a shopping center company, or ownership company, that's a totally new set of problems that you didn't anticipate.
Absolutely. And with that, I would even add flexible. Being flexible, because that was, I will never, none of us will ever forget March of 2020, I don't think, but ever. But I do remember being on these calls. We started having these early morning calls. Kimco, the company I work for, is an East Coast company, so I spend a lot of time on early morning calls. But we'd have these early morning calls where really all we were doing is trying to brainstorm, how are we going to keep the shopping center relevant when people aren't even feeling safe to, or they can't come here. Maybe they can't come to the shopping center in the same way. Or maybe once they could come, how can we get them to come back and feel safe to come here? And then also, brainstorming ideas about, the acceleration of what had already kind of started, but the acceleration of, online shopping and what that meant for the shopping center itself, the brick and mortar piece of the shopping center, because that stuff was already happening, right? We saw the things in the news about how many people are shopping online, but then like overnight, everyone was shopping online, right? So how do you bring people back? So it's curiosity, it's flexibility, it's, wanting to like deeply understand the customer. And it's not just one customer, like every community has a different kind of customer. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you definitely have some part of yourself that has to be geared on the community and the customer, not just the bottom line. None of us would have jobs if we didn't really understand, especially as executives, how to drive the bottom line. But it's just so much deeper than that. You have to have this gut compass towards the consumer or whoever it is in your space that you're trying to serve. How do I make this better for them? What is their real problem? How do we, with the tools that we have, fix that problem?
Yeah. They're interconnected too, right? If you, there's like that cheesy saying that I remember, like, as a kid, that if you love what you do, you never, like, it's all connect. You'll make the money, right? It's
Yep.
similar in that way with shopping centers where it is about the bottom line, but it's if you also make it about the customer, then the customer will come and the bottom line will, all the things
Yeah.
that you've been trying to accomplish, financially will also happen. If you don't worry, if you're never thinking about the customer, then you're not going to create an environment where people are going to want to come and shop there, or tenants, because they're also our customers, right? The tenants,
Yeah.
we're not going to, the tenants aren't going to want to come. If the shopping center is not well maintained and it doesn't fit into that community, maybe it's a community, a Latino community, for example, that's going to be a different customer that you're trying to attract. And you're also, some cases, not always, but some cases, you may be attracting different retailers as well. So it's deeply, like you said, about not just the bottom line, but also about the customer.
Well, I sort of said it a minute ago, but I'll say this differently. I end up saying this a lot when I am mentoring people here at the firm and in other walks of life. But relationships, skills, and experiences are the three forms of capital I was really taught as a young person to try to accumulate. And I think especially in New York City is so expensive. Seattle, San Francisco are very similar. But it's easy to be distracted by the salary you might get earlier in life, or as an owner by the returns you might get by structuring the deal initially one way for the tenant or for their customer. But if you can focus on accumulating relationship skills and experiences for yourself, for your team, for whoever is involved in the project, you'll make a ton of money. It just may be at a later date. I think especially in real estate, there's a huge amount of capital that you're going to be able to earn. You just need to be patient about it and really focus on those other three things. Everything you're saying points to that for me. So
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and this isn't an experience necessarily that I was involved in, but it makes me think of one in particular in the Seattle area. For those who are familiar with downtown Seattle, I mean, the South Lake Union area, when I was growing up, was literally one-story industrial buildings. And it exists today, which is, for those who aren't familiar, is the home to Microsoft. It's the home to Amazon. It's a home to a number of biotech companies, Fred Hutch, for example, research center. And that community exists because a developer had a vision and they said, it might not make me money immediately. Like if I do it this way, it's not going to necessarily make me money immediately, but I'm going to make a lot of money and I'm going to do it a little bit differently. And over time, this is going to completely transform the city of Seattle. And I think probably a lot of people thought he was nuts.
Yeah.
But he was right. And now it's literally one of the most vibrant neighborhoods in Seattle.
Oh, and the green roofs and all the sustainable projects there, it's radically different.
Radically different. And that's in 15 years. I mean, and if you can think that way and just think a little bit more long term, yeah, I mean, that's ideal for sure.
So this takes me to this question that I love that I mentioned to you months ago when we were in Tahoe, I think. Why do you work? Not about the money. We all have to work for that and taking care of our families and such, but like, what's the real deep root for you around the work that you do and what you're looking to get out of it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's such an interesting question. I don't think anyone's ever asked me that question, taking away the money part before. So it's really interesting. I think that I think at the end of the day, and I actually had a conversation with somebody about this the other day. Someone said to me, obviously not going to say who it was, but somebody said to me, like, I just want to make money and like make my money and go home, and I think they were kind of complaining about their job. Right. And they're like, you know what I mean? And I was like, yeah, I really don't. Because when I go to work every day, part of the reason I go there, I need to feel like I'm making a difference. I need to feel useful. I need to feel like I'm learning and growing and evolving. And so I think that's the main reason that I go to work, because I get challenged here to be better and to learn more. And it gives you purpose, right? Like it gives me something a goal to achieve, a goal to work towards. I'm a very goal-oriented person ever since it's a little bit nerdy, but ever since I was a little kid, I always written down all of the goals that I have, and I fold them up and put them on a piece of paper and put them in my wallet. and I literally update them like every 4 years. I've done it ever since I was a kid.
Oh my gosh,
And
I love it. That's amazing.
now my son does it. But I think that's why I work. Like I like to grow and change and be challenged and have purpose and help be a helper.
So this takes me directly to some of the board work that I know you've begun to do. How did you get on your first paid board?
Okay. Yeah. So I think we've talked about this before. I'm on two nonprofit boards, but I am on a paid board that I've been on for probably about a year and a half now. I've wanted to do board work for a while. It's one of those things I feel like it's a huge topic of conversation with women right now at every conference we go to. Like, how do you get a paid board seat? Kind of the way that I approached it, for I don't know right or wrong, but was just networking and meeting people and making sure that people knew the things I was interested in, the things that I loved to do, and that made me, I guess, more excited about what I was doing. And I made sure to always be networking and kind of talking about those things when I'm in a work environment or even not in a work environment. Like if I have a friend who's in the legal field, for example, who's honestly the reason that I got this board seat. And we had talked a million times about how I wanted, board work. And she's like, what types of industries are you interested in? And, we talked about the types of industries. And when she had a client who owns a construction company that was looking for a board member, I was the first person that she thought of, because we had talked about how, although I have never worked in construction, find construction industry interesting. And it's an industry that I have enough experience in to like add some value, but they don't do retail, they do office and life science. And so she thought of me and she introduced them to me and me to them, and went through a pretty extensive interview process, just trying to, see if they were looking for somebody who had, experience on the, management of team side, a little bit of DEI and ESG experience as well, which I have through Kimco, but also understood the construction business. And so, that's kind of how it all came together in the end.
So do you meet with them quarterly? How frequently?
We meet quarterly, but we also have other meetings, right? So I would say in the last year, we've probably met maybe 6 or 7 times. I've started to, for example, I recently went and to their office to sit in on their monthly DEI meeting. So they have a group of people within the organization that work on DEI, and they just wanted me to come and hear what they're working on, and then maybe share some ideas on how they might be able to, add to that, or other avenues they might be able to take. So yeah, I mean, it's at least 4 times a year, but it depends, I think, also how much you want to put into it. Like I find that side of the business interesting too, the DEI side. So when they mentioned, hey, would you be interested? I jumped all over that, because especially in the construction industry, it is one that could use a little bit of mixing up a little bit of diversity. And it's not an easy one. It's not an easy problem to solve. So I thought that would be a fun challenge to try to help them with.
So what is the best part of it? What's the best part of the board work? And I'm going to ask you, what's the hardest part too?
I think the best part of the board work probably is, it's a good question, probably a combination of learning a little bit more deeply about another side of the business. So they, like I said, they don't do retail, they do office and life science. And it is construction, and I manage construction folks. I don't, I never done construction work myself. So learning a little bit more about a different side of the business. And then probably a little bit of, again, the reason I get up every day is being able to add value.
Yeah. So the hardest part?
I think the hardest part is that, well, in this particular board, I'm the only independent board member. So everyone else on the board is with the company. So trying to get to know the personalities and their motivations, and making sure that when I show up in a room, that I'm showing up as like a person who's supportive of them and the company, but might share some ideas that are different than the direction they're currently taking, and being able to articulate that without it being, threatening or annoying, frankly. So I think that's probably the most difficult part. it's not like it's impossible, but it takes a lot of finessing. And really it takes, we talked about this a little bit earlier, like knowing people and being able to create those relationships with each one of the board members so that you can have those strong relationships with them. So when you're in the room, you guys are talking about hard things, that it's not, that, so it's an easier conversation, it's more of a back and forth conversation that way.
Yeah, I know that our board and a lot of the shareholders who observe the board at B&E, it was in year one, a very different experience than, we just had a board meeting maybe a week ago, than here we are in year 6, because there is a trust and teaming and collaboration. There are always people who are going to have some friction with one another, or just a difference of opinion. I think most of our guys really like each other, but just a difference of opinion. But you learn year over year how to communicate that and hopefully get things done. So definitely takes a little bit of time on board work, I would say, to be as productive as you want. So
yeah, and that goes back to like being able to, I think I mentioned this before, like you might not get it right the first time, and you may make some mistakes, but that's okay. And so figuring out how you recover from those and grow from those, and then kind of pivot and figure out, maybe how to get your point across a different way, or maybe listen a different way. Like those are all things that that are really important, I think, with that board work, especially if you're an independent board member, because you're the only outsider really there.
it's really difficult to, if you're coming in and you're one of the only women. I think that's always a little bit of a challenge as well. Just your positionality in the room and what the expectations of the other players are can really be a wonderful thing. I've had it be a wonderful thing, but sometimes you do have to earn respect in a different way as well.
Yeah, I have a woman who works for my husband's company, actually, who sits on a number of boards. She's just incredible and brilliant woman. And so I asked if I could meet with her before I was going to have my first board meeting with them, just to kind of pick her brain about what she would recommend, because she's been sitting on boards for a number of years. And one of the things she said is, well, we talked about being the only woman in the room, because obviously that happens a lot. And she said, just make sure when you go in the room for the first couple meetings, just listen and ask a lot of questions. Just listen and ask a lot of questions, so that when you're ready to really add value to the room, that you're doing it after showing that you're curious and that you're able to listen first. and then what you say when you're ready to say it is going to be a lot more impactful. And also you're going to know more and be able to add more value, because you're better understanding their business. So you're not just coming in as someone who doesn't understand their business and giving a bunch of opinions about things that maybe you haven't really learned yet.
Boards and teams
Yep.
definitely trust curious people more, because they've taken time to really learn something about who they are and what the project does and what the company does. I'm noticing you're using that word curious over and over, and I like that. Yeah, it's a good takeaway.
Yeah.
Well, in close, I want to know what advice you would give to any woman who's listening to this who would like to get into commercial real estate, and of course in our world in particularly net lease, but anything pertaining to retail, commercial real estate, from that first job to a board. Do you have any advice that you would give?
Yeah. So I talk a lot, and this, I don't know if this is advice on how to get into commercial real estate as much as it's advice on how to be the person that they call when they're looking for someone to fill a role, right? To step up to the plate. And I give this advice to young folks at Kimco all the time. And I think it's really super important to always be preparing for the next thing. And now I don't want to use the word curious, but part of that is like always wanting to know and understand not just your role, but how your role fits into the bigger picture of how the company is running. Because if you're understanding how your role fits in the bigger picture, and you understand how each one of the other teammates that you work with every day, like what they do every day, and how that fits with your role, then it makes you a much more well-rounded real estate professional. Secondly, be visible. So what does that mean to be visible, right? Like be visible, meaning if there is an opportunity to work on a special project, raise your hand. Like if there is, because that could give you exposure to the executive team, or that could get you exposure to somebody who's looking for somebody for a new role. They don't even know, it hasn't been created yet, but in the future. And you want to be in a position where you're constantly learning, adding value to the team, and also being visible so that when there is a new opportunity available, you are the first person they think of. Or somebody else is, somebody else in that room thinks of Camille because they worked on something with Camille. So that networking piece of the puzzle, I think, especially for really anybody in their career, but especially for young folks to take that next step, you really need to be visible because people need to know who you are and what you're capable of.
It's really great advice, Carmen. And what's fun for me is I have seen you with members of your team and how much they admire you and look to your leadership and how much you respect that and honor that. You seem like you really care about the teams that work for you. And I can imagine you giving them some of this advice. It's just great advice. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I do care for them very much. And I think that's just really a big part of being a leader. The most important part of being a leader is making sure that the people that work for you, are fulfilled and have the tools that they need to take that next step whenever that next step's available, whether it's at the company you work at, like what I say them all the time, whether it's at Kimco or it's at another organization. If that's what you want, I want to help you be prepared for that step. So yeah, it's fun.
It's great. Well, thank you for sharing all this today. I think this is going to be one of our favorites going forward. This has been really generous of you to share so many personal stories, and some of it is from a first job all the way up to the board. It's very exciting. So
yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was super fun, and it's always good to see you. And I appreciate you inviting me here.
You too. Thanks so much.